Hey, Florence, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Allison. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I realized recently when I was listening to some old podcast episodes that I start pretty much everyone with like, I'm so excited to talk about whatever the thing is. And I am excited to talk about our topic today, which we'll call aging in place for now before you and I tear apart that actual name. But it's also that it's an important topic to cover. It's a lot less kind of like fun, but I'm in real estate, and this topic actually has been coming up a lot more recently because multi-generational housing is in higher demand, and people are considering accessory dwelling units to have family members stay with them as they age. But then, of course, I'm going to say it on the air. I'm almost 40, and I've got parents who are also aging who aren't going to be necessarily living in an accessory dwelling unit in my house, but would like to ideally stay in their house, I think, as they age. So the whole aging in place and talking about home modification. So that's today's topic. I think the people hopefully who are listening to this episode are probably more our age, though obviously everybody's welcome to listen to it, because we're the demographic who's probably going to have to help people navigate the situation, like our parents, and might be considering buying a home that has an accessory dwelling unit. So anyway, let's take a quick step back, and maybe you can tell our listeners where your background is and kind of how you arrived at, being our guest about this topic today.
Thank you so much, Allison. So my background is in physical therapy, and I would have to say about 20 years I have worked in nursing homes. I have worked in home health. I have worked in hospitals, and you just see that people come to the hospital because they've had issues at home. And so part of what my revolution was and my transition in my career was trying to find out how I can help differently. So I am now a certified aging in place specialist. And that has really forced me to look at the home in a different way and say, are they safe? It's different when you're a therapist and you go into the home and you're like, okay, let's do these exercises, move these bath mats. But now I look at these homes and just say, okay, can you get in and out of the home in a case of an emergency? Do you have any support? Are you cognitively sound? So we have to look at the overall picture just to make sure that if you are going to age in place, meaning this is the last place that you plan to live before you pass, is this home safe for you?
Yeah. Wow. This could get very heavy, and we'll try to keep it. We'll try to. I mean, listen, this heavy
it's reality.
Stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's reality. And you made an important point right off the bat, which is that more often than not, changes are hurriedly made in response to something that happens to somebody, a fall or an accident or a medical diagnosis.
Exactly.
And I read an interesting stat as I was preparing for this episode. The CDC shows that for adults 65 and older, $50 billion is spent annually on medical costs related to non-fatal fall injuries, and $754 million is spent related to fatal falls. And it just shows you like that this is something that's happening a lot. We have an aging population. It's costing money. It's stressful. It's just a huge kind of topic that I feel like is not covered enough. Like if you start searching for this stuff, like, I've started to have these conversations with my sister and brother and my parents about aging at home. And of course, I'm searching for this stuff, but I don't feel like it's like in your face as much as maybe it should be. As much as it should be.
You're right. And no one wants to think about anything bad happening. But the point is to prepare and plan. Because when you prepare and plan properly, you don't have to worry as much and make decisions in stress and anxiety. And so it's so awesome that your siblings are having this conversation now, because we're at that age, we call it the sandwich generation, where you're taking care of a parent and you could possibly be taking care of a child. And so you have to make sure both needs are met. And a lot of those needs overlap. And a lot of that happens from, is this home prepared for a toddler or an elderly person? And that's why multi-generational living is so important. It's so prevalent, especially culturally. It's just expected. But as we age and housing stock is not as desirable for people who have disabilities or have difficulties moving, the multi-generational living and adding that ADU and adding anything to change the home is what's most beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's so from a real estate perspective, which is clearly like my
Hmm.
my jam with all this stuff. You know, when you live in any city, but we can talk
Hmm.
specifically about the DC area. There's a reason why buildings go up because you have
Correct.
a limited amount of real estate where you can make these sprawling one level houses,
Hmm.
which would be quite ideal for, you know, an aging in place kind of situation because you don't have to deal with stairs and you don't
Hmm.
have to deal with potential falls from that. You can make wider hallways,
Correct.
things that are kind of the no-brainers when it comes to this topic.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, where are these going to be built if you want to stay in the same area or if you wanted to expand your house? We don't have these massive multi-acre plots that our homes are on,
Correct.
right? So it becomes an interesting conversation. And I've said this on this podcast many times that the
Hmm.
psychology of all of
Yes.
these topics are like so interesting to me. Like psychology in general, I love
Hmm.
it, but the psychology of this one in particular is like it's kind of like duh. Well, like you're
Yeah.
talking about end of life. I mean, you're talking about like
Yeah.
high stress situations, you know. Um but okay, so let's backtrack. So let's pretend that we want to start helping somebody
Hmm.
figure out what they should do,
Hmm.
right? And you can obviously not age in the place where you currently are. You can decide to move and build
Hmm.
another place that is more accessible, has various things, and we can talk about like that will be helpful, like more than just wider hallways and no stairs. And that's an option sometimes.
Yes.
And sometimes it would have to be a house in the same area, a house somewhere completely different. Then
Correct.
there's, you know, you can have yeah, and then you can have somebody try to figure out, you know, another place to go, a place that already exists, like an assisted living, or you
Correct.
know, there are varying degrees of, you know,
Hmm.
like places or communities that people can move to,
Correct.
that they aren't all like end of life places, right? Like some of them are
Exactly.
quite nice and just more community based.
Correct.
But the psychology of this and having this conversation is, I think, the first thing that we should really talk about quickly, which is like the pluses of moving if that's an option is that, you know, you could have increased safety and security, it could be less work,
Hmm.
increased social opportunities, there's chances for activities, more support. So
Yes.
those are some pluses,
And
but
those
the
are
possibilities go on.
no, so you are
Go
bringing up
ahead.
such a strong point because a lot of times when you still have two elderly people living in the home together, they do not want to move. They have each other, they have their community, everyone can reach them, they have their support. A lot of times, people who are more willing to leave because it's no longer safe or the home is just too much to maintain is someone who is a widower or someone who does not have children, because
Yeah.
having people that you can just walk into just because you're going to start your day is something that you don't get when you're isolated at home. And so it's part of how to think about, I'm leaving everything that I built, everything that I worked for. I'm not just leaving a home, I'm leaving memories, I'm leaving just,
Mhm.
there's a wall where I wrote all of my kids' heights and their ages and things like that. So you're not just leaving a home, you're leaving a lifestyle, you're leaving the feeling, the smells, and everything that's associated with it. And that's why it's such a hard decision. But I always say that if you cannot safely get out of your home, if you are living by yourself and you don't have a strong base of community, living in an assisted living or what we call a CCRC, which is a continuing retirement community, those things help you have a better quality of life than just wanting to stay at home just to be home.
Yeah. 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 So, okay. So let's get this back to real estate a little bit because
Okay.
we'll end up talking about psychology for 35, 40, 80 minutes. Okay. So we've got, let's say, me. Okay.
Hmm.
Let's pretend my parents lived around here and, they had a house that wasn't necessarily the best for them.
Hmm.
Let's talk about what you can do and maybe how you should go about working through this process as you're trying to decide to, you know, how to stay in your home. What are some things, some very acute things you can do?
Hmm.
Kind of what's the trajectory of it? I mean, you're the boss here and all this, and I think you've really worked through this with a lot of people. So
Yes.
give us some guidance.
So I think the biggest thing is just taking stock of your health, not just your physical, but also your emotional and your mental health. I think having a realistic understanding of who you are and how you present is going to be the first realistic conversation that you have. If you are still able to navigate your home, or if you're able to still make decisions, you understand to call 911 in an emergency, then we can already say, okay, you are safe to be at home. Then we look at the structure of the home. How many stairs is it to enter? Do we have a first floor setup? Meaning, do we have a full bedroom and full bathroom on the main level? Those are the most at the basic things that you want to be able to have in your home or create in your home to add safety to age in place. We, especially in DC, there's like 15 stairs to enter your home. There's people that I've worked with who can't even get in their home, so they can't get back. But the reality of it is rearranging furniture, using a different entrance and exit to the home, sometimes you have to create maybe a dining room into a bedroom or something that was considered an office to be able to say, okay, I could definitely stay in my home. I just have to change a few things. Home modifications, they can range from rearranging furniture, changing light fixtures, changing light placement, to a full bathroom remodel, gut changing and widening doorways. So it really just depends on what this person presents with, who is living with them, and the level of care that they need.
Yeah, I was sitting here and thinking about how I had a family member a very long time ago who ended up getting one of those electric chair things on the stairs that went up so that they could. Do they still make those?
Oh, they
Do
do
still
so
do
much.
those?
So yes, and they're expensive. They're very expensive. And that's why I recommend the first floor setup, because you have to think of the process of even getting on that chair. If you're not physically able to get on that chair lift to bring you down, you're kind of stuck. And in case of an emergency, that thing doesn't move any faster. You're going to just slowly go down. So they are helpful, but I don't think that they age with the person as well as just having a first floor setup. Because if you cannot physically get onto that lift, then the chair is no longer useful.
Yeah. So, wow. So I know this is probably a question that will be hard to answer, but you started talking about cost. So when you're going through this, cost must be a huge conversation you're having. I mean, listen, I can talk to you all day about costs of renovating homes in general, but it's not taking into consideration things I don't know. Like, I don't know if like cabinets with pulls down low where somebody in a wheelchair potentially could easily open, if those are special order and if those cost more, or if making your hallways wider. I've never had anybody do that before. Like, I don't know what those kinds of costs are. Like, so, what is that range? Like, how much should somebody plan to spend? And is there a point where you just say, it's actually probably better for you to consider not staying here, which again, there is a cost of the psychological components of all this. And nobody can say, well, my happiness at home is worth $50,000 or whatever. So aside from the emotional part, like the cost thing is like,
it's hard.
Guide us.
It's really difficult because it really is based on the integrity of the home. Not everyone's home is really suitable for certain modifications that they might need. I think the biggest equalizer is if you cannot get in and out of that home safely, then that totally changes the plan. You have to think, do I need to have a ramp? And ramps, depending on how wide that they're going to be and how long, they can range between $14,000 and $20,000. And so that's just for the ramp. And that hasn't changed anything in the home. And so if I can now use a ramp to get into the home, can I get to the bathroom? Can I get safely to the bedroom? If I needed a wheelchair, can I get into a bathroom? So you can widen a doorway, which is great. That can go about, depending on the home, about 1,200 to 2,300, depending on the structure. Sometimes these walls have concrete. Sometimes people have added additions and haven't really thought about, oh, yes, this used to be the outside wall. Now let's make it an interior wall. So it really ranges. I mean, there's bathroom remodels that can go from $8,000 to $20,000 because one thing is insurance does not pay for home modifications. people do not financially plan for them in the future. And so those are issues that are barriers to you wanting to kind of save and plan ahead when you have no idea. So if you're really thinking about home modifications, you should be thinking about it in your 50s and 60s. If this is a home that I'm going to have, then I need to start putting away and planning for those things. But the biggest thing is, if I cannot get safely in this home, that's going to really increase the expenses off the top.
My mind's going a mile a minute for a
Yeah.
bunch of reasons. The first is that maybe my listeners and viewers don't know this, but I was in like I was basically a personal trainer for people who were post rehab. So I called
I love
myself like
it.
a post rehabilitative personal trainer for
Yes.
over a decade.
I love
I worked
that.
briefly at I worked briefly at National Rehab Hospital before I started doing that. And so, you know, I had my first experience with somebody doing home modifications, not aging in place, just somebody who was wheelchair bound,
Mhm.
probably when I was like 23, and seeing it done. Like, I saw the execution. It was, gorgeous, and it was a new building, and so there was an elevator to get to the floor, and the modifications were done, before the building or that unit was even done. So it was totally, like, it wasn't like modifying something that had been there for a long time. It was fine. But I had absolutely no idea about the concept of how to actually do it from A to Z. I just saw the end product and was like, oh, that's great that it can be modified. And you're in physical therapy
Yes.
or have been in physical therapy. And I'm sure you never, when you were going through physical therapy, like, your training and afterwards were like, oh, a ramp costs $20,000 or whatever.
Exactly.
I mean, you're like, so my head's sitting here thinking, you've got a bunch of different skill sets that you're using to this, because you've got the understanding of the human body and the physical demands that are happening to the people who you're working with. You now have a rudimentary knowledge of how to build various things at home
Yes.
at their cost. So you're probably working with, developers or people to that degree who are, contractors who can go and fix and do these things for you. And obviously we've talked about the psychology part of it. It's just, and then we're probably going to we could get into like estate planning and planning. And, how do you properly get from, how do you get this stuff done? Okay, fine. We've decided you want to age in place in your 3-level home in Capitol Hill. I guess that's fine. I mean, that sounds crazy, but okay, fine. Like, you're planning to build an elevator in it or, whatever. Like, you've got to plan that stuff early, and an estate planner will probably be the person who can help you with all that. Or, and not really to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but here, like, power of attorney. Like, if you're staying in your home and there's 2 of you and you're both on the title and somebody sadly like loses the ability to, what would an attorney say? They aren't like
their capacity
right mind or something.
Changed. Yeah, capacity has changed to make decisions.
Right. And so then what do you do? Now you're like mid house being built. Maybe you want to sell it, but one person can't sign off because they're on the title. I mean, life can be a mess, but these are the kinds of things where if you really start thinking about it when you're completely fine and just saying like, kind of, I hope I live a long, healthy life. And that's the plan for now. But in the event that doesn't happen, like, let's get our ducks in a row. Let's get everything as ironed out as we can, for ourselves, the people who are living in the house, for our families, for everybody. Because my whole thing is, to go back to psychology again, when all this stuff starts to happen, if this sadly were to happen to somebody in my family where I can't, or where they, have to move, or we have to deal with this kind of, with figuring out what to do with the house, I want my energy to be spent on loving them and caring for them.
Well said.
And being there, like having my heart be there for them, which is I have less ability to do if I'm running around with my hair on fire, trying to figure out the logistics of what they want and how to do it and the finances and the whole thing, which unfortunately you can't ignore. Like,
you can't ignore
those things. So what ends up happening is like the emotional being there for somebody, that's what ends up leaving, at the expense of figuring things out. So,
well said.
If any, Yes, I'm Allison, realtor, ex trainer, psychologist, dog foster and owner. Like really, I'm a Renaissance woman.
But you're right, though. So, you're absolutely correct, because I've actually had a client that told me, I just want to be his daughter. That's all I want to do. I just want to be his daughter, because because there was no plan. Her mother had passed away unexpectedly 3 years ago. Her father was then diagnosed with dementia, and he was declining pretty quickly. I just want to be his daughter. She was cooking, cleaning, doing all the money management, making sure that there was a plan. She contacted me. She was like, I don't think he can live in this house anymore. I just want to be his daughter. So can I just do that? And everything that you described is exactly why caregivers have a hard time, because we're not planning before. We're actually in the moment trying to make lifelong decisions under stress and anxiety, and nothing ever works out that way. So very well said.
Well, thank you. Okay. So to kind of bring everything to a close here, if somebody is, if let's say I hadn't been talking about these things with my family, like, and we hear this podcast episode and we're like, okay, like maybe either I'm at the age where I should start thinking about this, or my parents haven't really thought about this, or I haven't talked to them about it. Maybe I should start that conversation. Can you give us some kind of starting places or things so that people feel like they, obviously they can contact you potentially if they actually need to deal with the aging in place, like it's acute right now.
Yes.
You're a great person to go to.
Thank you.
But any kind of helpful hints that you can give people so that they feel like they can start this off on the right foot?
I think, great question. I think the best thing is to ask, is this where you want to stay? Because if this is where you want to stay, then we have to start making plans. Okay, if this is where you want to stay, what do we need for you to be able to stay? Do we need a caregiver? How much money do we have? Who do we need in our family? Do we need to talk to just to facilitate more of a conversation? So if you have decided that you want to stay, the next steps are, what do we need to do to stay? Contact someone like myself, who would say, okay, if this is where you decide, let's do a home safety assessment. You have to take stock of everything that you have financially, physically, mentally, emotionally, cognitively, to make sure that if this is what you want, do you have everything set up? Build an emergency plan with the family that you have, because even if you decide to stay, modifications haven't been agreed upon yet, you still need an emergency plan. Who's that contact that can arrive in the home in 5 minutes? Who's someone who is close by? You want to make sure that you have that person. You also want to talk and make sure that there is an accounting of your physician, all your medications. Because when people stay at home, like I go visit my parents, I live very close to them. How are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. They always say that they're fine. But the next question is, are you having any issues with your doctor? Have you fallen? Do you have any issues with sleeping or your appetite? Because again, aging in place is not just the physical, it's about the emotional, mental. And sometimes when someone's not eating or they're having pain, that opens up a whole different conversation. So really just ask your parents, and I ask all my friends this age, ask your parents how they're doing. Are you fine where you're living? And what do you need in order to stay in the place that you're in? And I think that's a great way of starting the conversation with your family.
Well, that's really great advice. That's good. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me today. Like I said, I think it's really important. I mean, maybe I just think it's important for me to be talking about it personally. If nobody, and I can't imagine there aren't other people and feeling the same way as I am at my age, and just wanting to make sure that we're taking care of the people that we love, but in a way that's going to make them feel happy and comfortable as well. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Anybody who wants to kind of, anybody who wants to ping me and wants to get in contact with you, I will make sure to put them in touch, and we'll link your information also in the podcast notes. And thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it. Have
My pleasure. You take care. Bye.